Wherever you are worldwide, it is always a pleasure being with you on this bi-weekly show on the national UAE platform. Allow me at the beginning to thank both the national team and my personal team for the deployed efforts to make everything perfect. A special acknowledgement goes to the national editor-in-chief, my good friend, the one and only Mina Al-Uraibi, for her dedication, passion, wit, and guts in seeking new adventures. I am much happy to team up with this respectful and youthful publication, and we are both eager to making this cooperation a success. Today, I'm much pleased to host a man loved by everybody, a treasure. This is how people point out at him. He is an Emirati Minister of State in the United Arab Emirates government. He has been active in UAE government service since 1968. He is an advisor at the UAE Presidential Court. Born in Jerusalem and educated in Jerusalem and the United Kingdom, before settling in Abu Dhabi, he began his career there as a journalist in 1967. He became Director of Information in the Abu Dhabi, then the UAE, Ministry of Information, editing its first official newspapers. He also worked as a broadcaster and program producer and helped in developing Abu Dhabi's broadcasting and media services. He is a director on a number of boards, including Abu Dhabi Center for Documentation and Research, the Paris-Sorbonne University, Abu Dhabi, the Emirates National School, the Permanent Higher Executive Committee of the Sheikh Zayed Book Award, and the Board of Trustees of the International Prize for Arabic Fiction. And the list is quite long. Zaki Nusseibeh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you.
First, the loss of Hatem Nusseibeh, your brother, who left us a week ago. Our common friend, Paul Al-Askari, says Hatem was often described as being larger than life, bon vivant, the fearless iconoclast, and a free thinker who loved life passionately. Your reactions?
He was a great man, and therefore his loss was a great loss, not only for me, for his family, for his direct family, for his larger clan, but also for the wider community who knew him, worked with him, and loved him. It was sad for us to know that he has left us so soon. For me, he was always my younger brother, and I looked to him as a young person. And then to suddenly see that at the end of a long and accomplished career, where he was beginning to prepare himself for a number of journeys and adventures, learning languages and traveling across the globe, he was taken away from us. But at the same time, I must say that he was a blessed person. We find solace in the fact that his life was filled with love, with joy, with laughter. We find solace in the fact that his company, Total, did an amazing gest in taking his body to be interred in Jerusalem, next to his parents and ancestors. And we find solace in the fact that he departed in peace. When the time came, he departed in peace and without pain and without suffering.
One thing is sure, that Hatem Nusseibeh has impacted every single person he has encountered. He has so many friends, and I have followed on Twitter and other platforms what people from all over the world wrote about him and said about him. May you perpetuate his loving memory. Well, both condolences and congratulations are in order, Your Excellency. The loss of a brother cannot but make us think about the importance of family. The Nusseibeh clan is the oldest Muslim dynasty in Jerusalem. It has a long history and tight bonds with the Holy Land, Jerusalem, since the days their first forefathers arrived into Jerusalem in the 7th century. Emirati today, how much of you remains Palestinian?
The heart belongs to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem belongs to the heart of every single individual on this planet. We are all tied, attached to Jerusalem as our spiritual anchor. But at the same time, the heart is fully Emirati, because it was in the Emirates that I was able to find and fulfill my destiny, and particularly because I could do this marching in the proximity of one of the greatest leaders that humanity has ever brought onto the world stage.
The deal of the century made Palestinians and the Arab world lose the land, but not the history, the respect, but not the empathy, the battle, but not the dream. Did you feel concerned?
Fully concerned, and from the outset. In fact, one of my friends from Cambridge sent me a poem that I apparently had translated in 1968 for Uns al-Hajj. And that was a poem about shame for what we have gone through in losing our heritage. It was about shame in how the Arab world, where it has got to, where it has arrived in dealing with not only now this issue, but with every issue that came our way. But at the same time, I had the chance, the opportunity, the good fortune of continuing to be concerned with the cause of Palestine, with the cause of Jerusalem, with the injustice that had been meted out to the people of Palestine, because Sheikh Zayed, the leader I worked with, was fully committed and passionate about helping the Palestinian people and about bringing justice, redressing the injustice that they have gone through. So I felt throughout my career, working with Sheikh Zayed, working with the UAE government, that everything is being done in a very difficult situation to try and help resolve, help bring to a conclusion, to a peaceful conclusion, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian issue, to set up a state, independent state that all the world has agreed is a necessary step forward towards the security and stability of this region. We have not been able to achieve much, unfortunately, but at least we were doing whatever we can in order to help in this cause.
Recently, the UAE shared its first direct message on their position on the annexation plans of the West Bank to the state of Israel. As Palestinian born, how did that make you feel? And what do you see in the future for this situation?
Let me start by saying that the situation looks bleak. Let us not kid ourselves. We are in a situation that is worsening every day. The UAE, as usual, tries everything it can to be positive, to be proactive, to try to help. And let us not forget, we need to help people in the end. We are not talking about an abstract issue of occupying further land, of occupying water resources, of bringing in immigrants to live in the place of the indigenous population. We are talking about the suffering that these people has to go through. I am confident that the Emirates will continue these efforts, notwithstanding the fact that the outlook is very bleak.
So since your childhood, you were fed and nurtured with those values and principles, how do you think your parents have shaped the man you are today? Your love for languages, your curiosity, your thirst for culture, for dialogue?
Well, I was fortunate to have been born in Jerusalem, which is a city where the three faiths, if you like, intersect in order to create of one place, a city, an idea, an encounter between religions, faiths, beliefs. And it was a beautiful and is a beautiful city. And so when I was young, I grew up amongst the mosques, the beautiful mosques, the churches, the people who lived and worked in Jerusalem, a cosmopolitan society that was open and liberal. We had good education that was provided for us in our primary schools. I had parents who were very passionate about teaching us the values in life. I remember that my father, as an example, always upheld the values of public service, the fact that you do not come on this earth in order to look after your own personal interests, but you try to do what you can to serve and help your community. My mother, God bless her soul, was a deeply spiritual person, a Sufi in her religious, if you like, passion, but also a poet. And so she taught us the love of language and of poetry. I had friends. I was fortunate in having friends from different religions and different backgrounds who taught me how to live in respect of others and how to live in trying to understand one another. And then, of course, my father sent me early to England to continue my secondary education. I was very fortunate in having, again, a top education that was provided to me in my secondary school, where I took my exams before joining Cambridge, where I was able to continue developing the ideas, the curiosity, the values that were seeded in me when I was a little child in Jerusalem, walking the streets of Jerusalem and looking up to my father and mother as my ideal roles that I wanted to emulate and be respected by them for what I am aiming to do.
Then came your turn to found your own family. What do you think is the role you've played in raising your daughters? Lana, who is currently a remarkable diplomat in New York City, and Diala, who is the director of Abu Dhabi Art. Both of them are watching us now. I personally do not know Anwar, but do you think that values and principles are transmitted from one generation to another, or for each era, the values differ and change?
I tried to instill in my children the same values and ideas that my parents instilled in me: hard work and curiosity, respect for the other, and the desire, the passion to open up to others while preserving your own identity, your own heritage, and your own spiritual roots, if you like. I try to teach them, I think, the most important gift that any parent can give his children, the gift of reading. I really started them very young. I used to take them back and forth, backward to school and forth to school, and tell them stories, but stories from Shakespeare, stories from the Greek gods, stories from Antar wa Abla, from A Thousand Nights, so as to make them from the start enthusiastic about going out and reaching out for those books. I also tried to instill in them the art of music so that they could listen, also play, but also listen to music and understanding. And I remember our holidays, we spent a lot of time going through museums, looking at art, so that, and I am proud to say all three of them came out with a huge sense of public service, the need to be useful to your community, the need to do things that are of value to others around you, the need to have empathy towards others, the need to be open to all beliefs and to all other religions and value systems, the need to respect one another, and at the same time to retain your soul and your identity. If I had succeeded in some or part of this system, bringing them up, I would be very happy.
Your Excellency, the encounter with His Highness Sheikh Zayed changed your life. Was it a twist of fate or a stroke of luck?
I think it was both at the same time. You know, when I was in England and when I was in Cambridge, in fact, I had met Sheikh Zayed by chance because he came in 1966, in the summer of 1966, and before he became ruler, to have dinner at the Jordanian embassy in London where my father was ambassador. And so I met him and met some of his companions. And that started my interest, if you like, in Abu Dhabi and its leader. And so I read books about him and read about the country and read about the region. Now, at the same time, our family had some business interests in Abu Dhabi from the 60s. And in fact, in 1964, I had come to Kuwait to stay with my sister during one of my school holidays. And she told me, why don't you go to a place called Abu Dhabi and look at around it? It's a new place that is being developed. We have a company camp, if you like, that you can stay in. So I went there, and Abu Dhabi that time, of course, was a fishing village by the sea, very small. But in 1967, when I came down from Cambridge, we had the Six-Day War. And by that time, my parents had gone back to Jerusalem. The whole Middle East was in meltdown. And my father said, why don't you go to Abu Dhabi and try and work with the company as a future career? Because there is nothing to be done in either coming back to Jerusalem or in the Middle East itself. So I came out in 1967 to work with the company, and to make things short, it didn't appeal to my soul. So I started working as a stringer, which is a roving correspondent who would get paid whenever he had an article published. Reuters, Financial Times, The Economist, BBC, Agence France Presse. I became a kind of moving press conference in the early days. And within 3 or 4 months, I really had met everybody, decision makers in Abu Dhabi. It was still a small village. And within 4 months, I had met Sheikh Zayed, God bless his soul, interviewed him for an English documentary, translated for him during that interview, and then that was an encounter with destiny, if you like. And from that day on, I worked with Sheikh Zayed and with the government of the UAE.
You must have had some great adventures with the founding father. Can you tell us one of these stories?
Yeah, he's an amazing person, not only as a leader with a vision, which he did have, but as a humane person, humble, and with empathy for everybody around him. You know, when I first started traveling with him, I will tell you 2 stories because I think they are significant. The first is we were in Spain walking around Alhambra, and that was in 1969, and I was very young and enthusiastic, and I wanted to push the tourists away from his path, you know, making way for the ruler. And actually he told me off, and he said, we mustn't be any bother to those other tourists. We are all tourists here. Let us walk with them as if we are with them. And that happened. And then in Spain also, the same incident. You know, we were watching the landing of the first man on the moon in 1969, and all his companions were saying, but this is not true. You know, nobody can go through the 7 heavens. This must be done in a studio somewhere. And Sheikh Zayed told them, no, it can happen. This is the will of God. God created man and the universe, and man can do everything because it's in God's will. And they all said, you are right, Al-Umrah. And that was the way that he led his people. He always brought them along with him, but by convincing them of what was right and what was not.
Your Excellency, people have always looked to the UAE as a haven of peace, leisure, business, and love of life. For most of the past 4 decades, the UAE have maintained a low-key role in the region. However, in recent years, its military has worked side by side with the US in the fight against Islamist extremism in Iraq and Syria. The UAE forces had a role in Afghanistan too, as a member of the international coalition. It has been almost a decade where UAE is the new key role player in the Middle East. What is your say about this shift?
Ricardo, it is always and will always remain a haven of peace and economic prosperity and leisure and well-being. It will continue to be a place that welcomes 200 different nationalities, different religions and belief sets and sects who can live and prosper and do well in the Emirates, and who can help also their people in the countries where they came from. But from the very outset, and let me also say this, from the very beginning, the UAE was always active to act not independently, but in consort with the allies and friends and the international communities in order to bring prosperity and peace, not only within its own frontiers, but also around it. Sheikh Zayed always said that you cannot live as an island of prosperity and well-being if you're surrounded by an ocean of conflicts and poverty and deprivation. And therefore, we must always play our part in helping others, in helping to bring stability and security to our region. And the UAE always played that part, even during the tragic war in Lebanon, the civil war in Lebanon, when the UAE joined with the international United Nations forces in order to take away the mines that were left behind. It was always active in different ways. The UAE was never acted on its own. The UAE always believes that it should act with a consort of allies and friends who share our values and our beliefs. Now, today we live still in a very rough neighborhood. We live in the Middle East, a region that is riven by strife and conflict. We live in a region that is being fed the poisonous ideology of hatred and of extremism in your belief systems, in refusing the other, in trying to annihilate the other. And therefore, we still believe that it is our duty, working with our friends and allies, whether international or regional, Arab or non-Arab, in order to bring this peace and stability to our region. And we believe it is our responsibility to work with our friends and allies in order to combat extremism, because in the end, extremism brings nothing but destruction, not only to the countries where it has been spreading, but also to our own region and to the world.
The UAE will turn 50 next year. What has been the biggest change or achievement you have witnessed, and what do you hope for the future?
You know, Ricardo, I am always amazed by what is happening around me. I have been a witness, as you know, from the beginnings. So when I go back in my memory to the 60s and early 70s, when all my friends, the diplomats and the journalists who came through the region were telling me the Emirates will not survive the 70s. You know, there were too many threats to its stability and security. It does not have the infrastructure. It does not have the wherewithal to survive as a modern state. And Sheikh Zayed with his brother rulers worked together to create this state and this wonderful country where we live today. And you have seen it, and you have come here and witnessed and experienced yourself the very special DNA that it has. So the first 40 years, I remember a time when we came here and there was no electricity and no water, no roads. You had to drive along sand dunes in order to go down from one emirate to the other, or even within the city of Abu Dhabi. The last 40 years, I would say, have witnessed the establishment of cutting-edge infrastructures that brought the UAE into the 20th century. And that has started with education, with health services, but also communications, and then creating this environment for business and being this open society that brings people from all over the world to participate in this progress. And then I believe the next 50 years, and this is a year where the UAE is preparing itself, in fact, to witness the next 50 years. The leadership of the UAE have put as an objective that in the next 50 years, the UAE by 2071 will have achieved the number one in a number of domains. Of course, there's the social services, education and health, technology, We are a country that is putting the foundations for renewable energy, for artificial intelligence, try and work adapting to what this world brings us in terms of challenges. So my answer to you, I believe my children, but even more so my grandchildren, will be able to see in the next 50 years the kind of miracles that I myself saw in the last 50.
Your Excellency, people love you and they have so many questions to ask. However, I do still have some issues I'd like to raise with you. If it's possible, I would kindly ask you to answer in a brief way. What has turned the UAE into an expat magnet over the past decades?
Its environment of openness, it's welcoming the others. It's the saying that Sheikh Zayed, I heard him say himself, that we must be open and kind to our own citizens, but we must also be more open and kind to the expatriate, because an expatriate is a stranger who comes amongst you in a strange land. We need to look after him.
How has culture played such an important role in the way Abu Dhabi decided to embark on this journey in terms of universities, museums?
Because from the outset, Sheikh Zayed said, and the leadership today say, that our real resource is in our youth, in our own people. We need to bring to them the education and cultural flowering that is needed in order to make sure they are equipped to face the challenges of the 21st century. Culture is a central part of the UAE's strategy for creating durable development, for opening bridges to the world, and for bringing peace, stability, and prosperity within our frontiers and in the region around us.
Lisa Ayash asks you, do you think the economic growth of newly developed states is built and dependent on the setbacks of regional war-torn countries?
No, I believe that in effect, development depends on leadership, on governance. You can be in the most horrific of regional environments, and the UAE survived really the most horrific of regional conflicts you can imagine. And yet, because its governance, because its leadership were focused on the need to develop the country and bring prosperity to its people and help those around them, it was able to develop in the way that it did. You need good governance, good leadership. This is the real key to bring success, economic success, to any country, whether new or old.
Noor al-Muayyimi would like to know, if you had to change one thing when you were young, what would it have been?
You know, I would not change a single day of experience that I had gone through, because I believe that they were blessed days that I had spent, first when Sheikh Zayed was alive, and today in being able to witness what is possible, what can be done in a country that is optimistic and open and liberal and allows others to come and create, to be a creative society.
Your Excellency, the upcoming question of Mina al-Uraibi made me think of the fact that I have paid you visits a couple of times to your houses in Al Ain and in Abu Dhabi. And we need to admit that once we step in, we feel we are in a museum or in a library. Books, all sorts of books and art pieces and art and paintings all over. Mina is asking you, you are known for your love of books. What 3 books would you say we should all read?
That is a difficult question, because I keep changing my mind every time I read a great new book. But I can tell you what is worth reading. There are the last 3 books I have been reading, because I found them an amazing discovery. The 3 of them are interrelated. 2 of them are about the Palestinian artist Kamal Bullata, who sadly left us, departed from this life last year. One is about his work, and the second is the collection of his writings. And they are worth reading because they bring new, if you like, insights into the development of art in the Arab world, the modern art in the Arab world, and insights into his own experience with art and with abstract art and with calligraphy. And the third book, which came out recently, is the book that writes about the exhibition that took place in the Gray Gallery in New York for the collection, the Barjil collection, my dear friend, Sheikh Sultan bin Saud al-Qasimi, and it's about the abstract in modern art, Arab art. And it talks about the development of this abstract art. So if you ask me now, this week, what are the 3 books I would really encourage people to read? I would say these 3 books. Ask me next week, it may be something else again.
So next time I see you, definitely, I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm going to see what do you suggest. And I'll take this suggestion into consideration, and I'll buy the books accordingly. Well, I've got 2 questions in a row from Fayona Jagozi. I believe they are interrelated. How can life be improved for the indentured laborers of the UAE? And in terms of fraud building and so forth, who provided the core of labor for this?
I will once again come back to say that the UAE, of course, depends and has depended throughout the decades of development on the major contribution brought by Indian, Pakistani, Southeast Asian labor who came here, worked here, and spent their lives here, building our cities and our different urban centers. But at the same time, I can assure her that the government has always had the interests of these people at heart. I know there were a number of reports that were published from time to again. We listen, we hear about them, about the mistreatment of labor in the Gulf countries, about the kafala system, about the rights of labor, about the payment of their salaries. And I know that the UAE government is doing everything it can in order to bring legislation that will provide help to this labor and to ensure that they are paid their salaries through the banks now rather than to be paid in cash. Undoubtedly, from time to time, there will be issues and there will be problems. But I know personally, from Sheikh Zayed, as I said, when he used to go to the Mina, the harbor in Abu Dhabi, where some Iranian merchants used to come across the Gulf, bringing trick trucks with them, things to sell. And he would buy everything they had because he told us, you know, these merchants came here trying to sell so that they take food back to their families. We need to help them. So the empathy, the feeling, you know, the trying to help is there. If there are failures, the government tries its best always to rectify any failure that there may exist in the system.
Bob Debas asks you, we know that the UAE is a peacemaker in the region, and many in the Arab world feel that Qatar-Saudi issue, as well as Yemen-Saudi, should be worked on. What is the UAE doing to bringing peace to both of those crises?
You know, the UAE is a firm believer in the need to work for peace, to resolve all issues by diplomatic channels, to try to resolve all conflicts in peaceful ways. And we always work in consort with our allies and friends to bring this about. Now, only recently, I think it was yesterday, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Anwar Nusseibeh, said that one of the real important, if you like, preconditions or necessary steps that need to be taken in this region is really de-escalation post-COVID, because we are facing a lot of issues with COVID. We will come to the end, perhaps, of this pandemic, at least the first stage of it. We really need to work at de-escalation, but de-escalation in the region, which is necessary because all countries can only prosper when there is peace and stability. That can only come when there is a will on all sides to do this. He also added that for the time being, it seems to be a difficult outlook, but nevertheless, our hope has always been, and we will continue to work with our allies and friends in order to de-escalate situations whenever we can and bring prosperity and peace to people. Because in the end, as I said, whether it is in the Yemen, whether it is in Libya, whether it is in this region. We need peace and we need to bring prosperity. And particularly post-COVID, when there is going to be an economic issue that faces all countries of the region, we need to focus on working together, collaborating together to help our peoples lead a better life.
Your Excellency, from France, the UK, Austria, Germany, to the USA, you've been honored with more distinctions than I will have time to enumerate. What is sure is that you stand as a true example of dialogue and cultural exchanges. It makes me think of Amin Ma'louf, our common friend, who once said, "I am the son of the road. My country is a caravan, and my life is the most unexpected of voyage. I belong to earth and to God, and it is to them that I will one day soon return." To whom do you belong?
I belong to my heart and to what my heart tells me is the right thing to do. I know, like Amin Ma'louf has explained to us, that every human being is a collection of identities, and that every human being needs to bring those identities to coalesce together to find what is nobler in them. In the end, you belong to what your heart tells you is the place that you belong. And this is the place where I belong, in this oasis of Al Ain that I fell in love with the first time I saw when I came here more than 50 years ago.
In your opinion, how can these values help us reach a better understanding of one another? And can they be used to avoid tension, misinformation, and lack of perspective that are taking over the world lately?
You know, Ricardo, where does extremism spring from? Where does hatred come from? Where is violence bred? It's always when you look at the other and say, he is another. He is something that is not to do with me. Once we learn, as we did in Jerusalem in my young days when we were at school, once we learn that the other is actually me, that there is no real difference that takes me away from, that makes me different from the other. When we learn that we need to respect each other, when we learn that we need to respect each other's beliefs and systems and religions. You know, we talk about tolerance, and the UAE had celebrated the year of tolerance. And it's not, and here we celebrated it because we said it's not just tolerating the other, you need to empathize with the other. And this is the message that His Holiness Pope Francis brought with him when he came here for the first visit in the peninsula to give the sacred Mass to more than 180,000 believers. Violence comes from this, trying to isolate the other, to say that he is different and that he is below. You degrade the other and therefore you try to eliminate the other. We have to teach each other how to be tolerant towards each other, respectful of each other, and only through this can we succeed, especially in today's world.
Your Excellency, we have received so many questions. I'm going to ask them gradually, and I kindly ask you to answer them in a quick, brief, and concise way so we can accommodate almost everybody. Our friend Asma Al-Mutawa, the founder of Salon Al-Multaqa, whom we greet, asks you, what is the best piece of wisdom learned from Sheikh Zayed?
Be humble. Do not be proud of who you are, but be proud of what you do in serving others.
And she has another question as well. Your role in cultural diplomacy, and how do you deal with culture during these days?
Cultural diplomacy is one, as you know, an aspect of foreign policy that has been in use for thousands of years. So we are not bringing something new to the table, although the terminology itself of cultural diplomacy has been developed recently. And Sheikh Zayed was our first cultural diplomat in 1969, before we had an infrastructure in Al Ain. he asked us to build a museum, an archaeological museum that talks about the culture of this region 5,000 and 4,000 years ago, when there was commerce between this area, the communities who lived here, and the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. So culture is in our DNA, and our culture, the culture of the UAE, is a culture of openness, seafaring. It's a mixture of a seafaring tradition with also the desert traditions of generosity and honor and help to your neighbor and to strangers and to the guest who comes to your abode. So cultural, what I am doing is simple, is I am trying to use the cultural assets that we have in plenty in the UAE, both public and private, the cultural stakeholders who have been very active in whatever they carry out, and then act as a transmitter, a facilitator with our embassies and missions abroad, because this is a message we need to take abroad through our embassies to tell the world who we are and to tell the world the message about what we stand for. This is what I try in a small way to help, but it is something that is central to the UAE government's policy. I mean, we have a Ministry of Culture that is very active in promoting the arts and culture. We have departments of culture in every emirate. We have a Binali in Sharjah, an art foundation, private foundations. I'm happy to say that the UAE is really brimming with cultural activity that is important. We need to take this to the rest of the world.
Will the coronavirus impact the way governments allocate budgets, and will culture be the first victim of such changes as most fear and speculate?
Undoubtedly, there will be an impact. I mean, there is an economic impact, and as a result, governments are cutting down budgets, not only in culture, but across the board. But my sincere hope is that culture will be, in fact, supported and subsidized, because exactly this kind of pandemic, this kind of challenge that we are facing requires culture in order to bring us through the tunnel, through this dark tunnel that we are moving in, and to see light at the end of this tunnel. Because in the end, we need to bring empathy, openness, creativity, and in the long term, this is also economically rentable. It is something that is viable, economically viable. It has been shown over and over and over. The more you invest in cultural development, the more you serve your economy. So I sincerely hope that governments look seriously at the cultural sectors in their countries and try and subsidize and help rather than cut the help that they give to them.
Dr. Nidar Juma has a good question. Humankind is united when at risk. Same virus kills Chinese, Americans, Arabs, etc. And most likely, any of the antiviral cures currently on trials will be effective across nations without discrimination. Is the world finally convinced we are all equal and should be kind and tolerant to one another?
This is my sincere hope. You know, to be realistic, unfortunately, what we see happening down is more polarization and more building of walls. But in the end, we need to understand that we are only as strong as the weakest member of our international community, and we are only safe as long as the weakest individual in our community is safe. And so I hope, and in spite of what is happening in terms of polarization around us, that this virus, which, as she said, crosses frontiers without knowing any borders, and hits all individuals without differentiating in color or religion or race or background, it must bring us together, because to come through this tunnel, this dark tunnel I've talked about, in developing this vaccine, we need a global collaboration. In giving out this vaccine, we need a global collaboration. This kind of, if you like, threat that nature has thrown at us is a reminder that we as human beings need to be humble, to understand our status in the order of things in this world, and to help each other, not to continue to harm one another.
Alexander has an interesting question. As people who identify themselves as Arabs, whether in terms of culture, customs, or tradition, how can we preserve our language, our identity onto next generations? As on one hand, the attraction of foreign language, namely English, and next generations turning away from what they interpret as an old and the language not being modernized.
You know, first of all, I don't think that the Arabic language is in danger. I know that this is something that worries many people who are in this field, but I believe that the language that has withstood the onslaught of time over the last 2,000 years will continue to be powerful. It's a beautiful language. The book I talked about that Bullata wrote is exactly about this, the spiritual strength of the Arabic language and its calligraphy, and the strength that ties the Arab to his language. Of course, let us not forget, it is also the language of the Quran that has been preserved through the centuries. But I believe that there is a responsibility, and here I agree with the questioner that there is a responsibility that we instill in our children, you see, the love of the Arabic language. The problem is everybody, unfortunately, treats the teaching, the instruction of children as something that belongs to schools or to teachers who come from outside their own household. It's the early days are what are important. So every parent should, from the early days, encourage these children to speak Arabic, to understand Arabic, to read Arabic stories, to bring Arabic comics rather than English or French or German or Italian. I believe the responsibility starts at home, but then after that, I believe it's the responsibility of governments to do much more to make Arabic language more readily accessible to Arabic speakers. And I have hundreds of ideas that would need a special webinar in order to discuss about this.
Lubna Hadid says, greetings from London. UAE 2030 vision to moving to a knowledge-based economy will mean harvesting tech savviness of local youth and absorbing them into the private sector, especially young women. How can we make STEM and arts more attractive to the younger generation in UAE and GCC area?
We are very serious about STEM and about the education that it brings to our schools. We have introduced them into our schools. We believe that this is central for the future. We are investing heavily in artificial intelligence, but I still believe strongly that the liberal a liberal education is equally important. We must not let one take precedence over the other. We must keep both of them together.
Suzy Salman is asking, how do you find the future of women leadership in the UAE?
We are a country in which women now are in leading positions, and we are proud of the fact. We have more than 9 ministers, half of our National Assembly. We have women fighter pilots. This is the road forward. As Thomas Friedman was saying on a webinar yesterday, you need to have gender plurality in order, and other preconditions in order to have progress in any society. We are proud of what we have been able to achieve. And I must say here that Sheikh Fatima bint Mbarak, you know, we have to be grateful to the great efforts she put into making sure that the Emirati woman is well educated, well trained, well equipped, steeped in her heritage and tradition, but also open to the world.
Erika El-Khershi asks you, the UAE will launch a historic mission to Mars. How does it make you feel to see this small country reach for the stars?
What an amazing, amazing experience to go through. Now, let me go back then to the first anecdote I brought to you. You know this, one of the men sitting with Sheikh Zayed in Spain to tell him that nobody can go through the 7 heavens was one of the chiefs of the tribe of the Manasir. And it is, I think, indicative of what is happening in the Emirates, that our spaceman who went to the space station was a grandson of that Mansouri. So the grandfather didn't believe that it was possible to go through the heaven. A grandson has been to space. This shows you where this country is going, where we can all go if we focus on investing in our youth, in our children, and to bring science and education and culture into their homes.
Fiona Jagose asks you, I noted that many youth in the UAE have very few responsibilities, such as cleaning up after themselves, preparing a meal, maybe even taking on a part-time job, and so on. While this might be fun and feel they were missing out on a thorough social education, do you think the youth should be encouraged to do some work within their lives so as to foster a deeper understanding and compassion?
Absolutely. I believe that's very important. I never forget one diplomat, a European diplomat who had 5 children. He was a Catholic diplomat from a friendly country. When his children grew up to a certain age, he told me, Zaki, I'm going to take them away from here because I don't want them to get used to the fact that if they want to have lunch, there will be a maid in the house to help them eat that lunch. So yes, I believe, again, the responsibility of parents to make sure that their children grow up with the right ideals and values and traditions.
Tony Biramis from Lebanon is asking you, due to the current situation in Lebanon, a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking of closing up their factories and businesses. What if a country like the UAE can give them incentives, lots of them, to move their businesses to the Emirates? Between brackets, I know a lot have already done that, but the remaining few are in a difficult economic situation. So you probably need special legislations. This will also definitely help the UAE economy. What is your say or answer about that?
First of all, let me say that my heart bleeds for the Lebanon. You know, I love the Lebanon. I'm used to the Lebanon in the 60s when it was the Switzerland of the whole region. And yes, we need those entrepreneurs to come and work here. The UAE, in fact, is focused on bringing creative energies, creative entrepreneurship from all over the region and from the Arab world. So these entrepreneurs who are not here, because as he said, many of them already are here, need to be encouraged. I agree. And the government is looking at different models and means of helping business pick up once this virus, the pandemic, leaves behind and once activity starts again. It's a very important suggestion, and I believe it needs to be followed up on.
Your Excellency, Zaki Nusseibeh, thank you so much for this enriching talk we had together. Like I've said and mentioned at the beginning, everybody loves you. And we have noticed from the tons of questions we have received, and of course, you know, from the content you have provided, you are an added value to each talk show and to each interview. I wanted to conclude my own way. However, I have received a small note, a very touching one, I'd like to share with you and with the audience. This note comes from a cousin of yours. He says, dearest cousin Zaki, you mentioned educating our children, but you are also a prime example of lifelong learning. Literature and art are a life endeavor. Perhaps our society can promote education of the old as well as the young. Hugs and kisses, Bashar Nusseibeh.
Education is for life.
I will give you the floor to end up and conclude your own way.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Thank you for everything that you do. You have been a major player in this region to bring understanding between peoples, cultures. You have been a great cultural icon. And I know that your life has been full of experiences that made you who you are. I hope that others will learn from your example. I am encouraged by what you are doing in spite of COVID, using this digital new technology in order to continue your mission. I wish you in it every success. And I wish all those who joined us today every success. I thank them. I hope that they have stayed out the COVID shutdown, lockdown, and I wish for them happier days ahead.
Once again, I'm much grateful. Allow me to thank my team and the national team for putting all their heart and efforts to make this show a success. Do not chat every 2 weeks. See you then. Bye-bye.